Hello, and welcome back to One Idea Way. I'm Hayden, and today I want to talk about someone whose name has become an insult. If you call somebody Machiavellian, you're saying that they're manipulative, cold, or strategic in a way that feels almost unethical, but the actual person behind that label is more complicated than that. Niccolò Machiavelli wasn't writing from a throne. He wasn't a king, he was just a political advisor in Florence during the Renaissance who watched governments collapse, alliances shift, and leaders lose power because they misjudged reality. And that's what his book The Prince is about, reality. Machiavelli doesn't ask what leaders should do in a perfect world. He's asking what they must do in a world as it actually exists. Because a lot of advice then and now operates in the realm of ideals. Be virtuous, be kind, be honorable. And Machiavelli doesn't reject those qualities, but he asks the harder question behind them. What happens when being good makes you weak? One of his most famous arguments is that it is safer to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. That line alone has shaped centuries of debate. It sounds harsh, almost cynical, but here's my take on what he's actually saying. He's saying that love is unstable. It depends on emotion, it depends on satisfaction, and it depends on people continuing to feel positively towards you. Fear, when managed correctly, is more consistent. It's tied with consequence, structure, doesn't fluctuate with mood. It's something that you can almost control. But Machiavelli is careful here. He doesn't advocate for cruelty for its own sake. He warns repeatedly that a ruler must avoid being hated. Fear is useful, but hatred is dangerous. There's a difference. That nuance gets lost when people reduce him to the ends justify the means. He never actually said that. What he does say is that outcomes matter. Stability matters. Survival matters. A leader who clings to moral purity while losing control may feel virtuous, but the collapse that would follow can harm far more people than being unvirtuous would. And that's the kind of tension that Machiavelli forces us to confront. Is it better to be morally admired and ineffective, or morally imperfect and effective? And that question doesn't just apply in politics. It applies to leadership in general, in teams, in organizations, even in your personal life. Another major idea in The Prince is appearance. Machiavelli argues that it's not enough to be virtuous. You must appear virtuous, because people judge by what they see, not by what they deeply investigate. It sounds manipulative, but it's more observational. Most people don't have access to what you intend to do. They only see what you actually do. So reputation isn't something that hides behind your reactions. It's something you manipulate as a tool. He writes that a prince must learn how not to be good when circumstances require it. Not because being good is useless, but because being rigid is dangerous. That idea unsettles people because it challenges the comfort of clear moral choices. People like to think of themselves as either good or bad, honest or dishonest, principled or corrupt. But Machiavelli thinks that people should live in the gray. He doesn't celebrate morality, he acknowledges the complexity behind it. Another idea that Machiavelli emphasizes is adaptability. Fortune, he says, controls about half of what happens in life. The other half is shaped by what he calls virtue, which isn't virtue in the modern sense, but strength, decisiveness, and boldness. Fortune is unpredictable. Circumstances can shift, alliances can crumble, and opportunities appear and disappear at whim. The leader who survives is not the one with the purest intentions. It's the one who adapts the fastest to the circumstances. And that's where Machiavelli's ideas are very modern. He warns against relying too heavily on mercenaries, people who serve you only for their own gain. Their loyalty evaporates when conditions change. To translate that beyond war, it's almost a warning of superficial alliances. Relationships that are only built on convenience do not last under pressure. He also argues that new leaders must act decisively early on. Small acts of disorder, if tolerated, can grow into larger threats. Problems ignored compound. And that's a harsh but practical observation. Indecision creates instability. Delayed action often requires future action to be more extreme. What's interesting is that Machiavelli doesn't glorify this cruelty. He advocates for controlled strategic severity if it's necessary. But he also says that cruelty should be swift, calculated, and limited. Repeated small punishments breed resentment. One decisive action establishes order and then allows stability for the rest. I mean, you don't have to agree with that to see the logic behind it. Another layer to this book is how deeply it distrusts human nature. Machiavelli believes that people are generally self-interested, loyal only when it benefits them. That sounds cynical, but Think about how often loyalty shifts when the incentives shift. He's not saying that nobody's a good person. He's just saying that you shouldn't build everything around the assumption that everyone will act ideally. It's more realism. And realism is what makes people uncomfortable with Machiavelli because it strips away comforting illusions. It asks you to see people as they truly are, not as you wish they are. One of the biggest takeaways from The Prince isn't that you should become ruthless. It's naivety that's dangerous. If you assume everybody's fair, you will eventually be blindsided. If you assume intentions matter more than outcomes, you're going to lose your influence. And Machiavelli forces you to separate this moral idea from strategic effectiveness. And that separation is almost the opposite of what people today want to believe because it suggests that power and goodness do not automatically align. But there's something people often miss about Machiavelli. He wasn't writing this book to celebrate tyranny. He was writing it after being exiled and tortured, trying to re-enter his political life. He wanted Florence to be strong, stable, and secure. He believed that weakness invited chaos, and that chaos would hurt everybody. So when he was advising leaders to prioritize strength and stability, he was thinking about long-term survival, and that's intrinsic to his ideas. The final idea I want to land on is this. Machiavelli is not teaching you to abandon morality. He's teaching you to understand reality before you act blindly. Power without illusion. If you understand how perception works, how fear operates, how loyalty can shift, and how fortune changes, then you can move deliberately and with control. If you ignore those things because they feel uncomfortable, you move blindly. And that's why The Prince still matters. Not because it tells us to be ruthless, but because it refuses to pretend the world is simpler than it is. Thank you for listening.